Welcome, everyone. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. We invite you to connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, subscribe to us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Next, I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any resources or bios shared during the conversation, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. Additionally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Next, I would like to make the very exciting save the date announcement to all of you that we will be having GLR Week 2023, July 17th through the 21st. This is a very exciting save the date, and we hope that you'll all mark your calendar for this exciting week. And also for our upcoming webinars, we invite you to join us next week to kick off the month of May. First, with a session co-sponsored by the Patterson Foundation at 12:30 Eastern Time on breaking digital access barriers in education, catalyzing effective community. That will be followed by a session on leaning into community-wide learning, what it takes and where it's happening. On May 9th, we'll have another doubleheader session, starting with a Crucible of Practice Salon on Get Delaware reading strategies for early school success, and another session on literacy and child well-being. Registration and information for all of these upcoming sessions in May will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Hattie Miles-Polka, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session about California's Community Engagement Initiative, a framework for sustainable systemic change. We all know that community and family engagement are key to student success, and today we're going to hear about this innovative initiative in California. We are lucky to be joined by a number of speakers. We have Yolie Flores, CEO and President of Families and Schools, Jan Gustafson-Corea, CEO of the California Association for Bilingual Education, Dr. Robin McIver-Brown, the Leadership and Outreach Department Director of the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, as well as Stephen Sterling Mitchell, Assistant Director of the Community Engagement and System of Support, California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. We will also have commentary from Yolanda Brown, the Community and Parent Liaison for the Northridge Academy and Pontiac Academy for Excellence in Michigan, as well as Ed.D. Cohen, President of the Institute for Educational Leadership. And now I'm very happy to introduce our moderator, Vito Borello, the Executive Director of the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. Welcome, Vito.
Thank you so much, Hattie, and good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, panelists and commentators. My name is Vito Borello. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. Our acronym is NAFSCE. And first of all, I want to just thank Ralph Smith and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for inviting me to join you all today. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading has been a long time partner and friend to NAFSCE. In fact, back in 2018, when Yolie Flores was with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we actually worked with the Council for Chief State School Officers and 18 state education agencies to work with them to develop birth through grade 12 family engagement frameworks, many of which are now been integrated into state strategic plans. So longstanding partnership with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Many of you, I'm sure, know of NAFSCE, and I want to just give you a sense of our mission and vision. We are focused on advancing policy and practice around family, school, and community engagement to promote child development and support student achievement. And we have a vision of a world where family engagement is universally practiced as an essential strategy for improving children's learning and advancing equity. Before we move into the subject of today, I was asked to kind of give an overview, if you will, or an update on family engagement and where we are. So I thought I would do that. First, around the federal budget proposal. There are increases for family engagement in many of those proposals. That includes Title I, which has a $2.2 billion increase to $20.5 billion requested. Parent Training Information Centers, $49.2 million is requested. That's actually over a 48% increase in the budget. And statewide family engagement centers are proposed at $20 million, similar to fiscal year 23, but actually double from 2018. I also want to talk a bit about some of the momentum that's happening in family engagement around educator preparation. And many of us know that teachers are not prepared typically to engage families before they enter the classroom. And this is presents one of the great challenges in this work. And so NAFSCI and many of its partners and stakeholders as part of its pre-service consortium released what we call the Educator Preparation Framework for Family and Community Partnerships. We released that in December. And in partnership with the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, the NEA, the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, and the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, CAPE, as well as 7 state teams that incorporated state education agencies and educator preparation programs or schools of education. And that led to a symposium that was just held 3 weeks ago at the NEA for federal and state agencies, educator preparation programs, national education associations and organizations, national family engagement organizations, statewide family engagement centers, and parent leaders. And so there's a big push right now to really spread and scale this framework. And I'm happy to say there are dozens of educator preparation programs and schools of education across the country that are now working with us to look at their scope and sequence their curriculum around how they can better prepare educators to engage families before the end of the classroom. So really excited to continue to update you all and share more with that. Next item I want to just touch on, and I'll be very brief about this, are parents' rights bills. I'm sure many of us are in the loop about what's happening around parents' rights. There was a Republican-led parents' rights bill that passed the House of Representatives by a slim margin to 113 to 208. It is not expected to pass in the Senate. There was a Democratic response to that bill from Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. What I want to say is this. No matter what political aisle you're on, the research is clear that it is the partnership of parents and teachers and schools that enables student success. And so, it's important that whatever bill is ultimately passed, that it embraces the idea of that partnership. And from our perspective, the House Republican bill was really cultivating a mistrust. And so I'll leave that there, but you'll hear more about this. Our hope is that there'll be dialogue over the next year so that we can continue to talk about the kind of parents' rights bills that is not discriminatory and is inclusive. And then lastly, conference season is upon us. So as you know, one of our commentators is Ed.D. of the Institute for Educational Leadership, our partner, and the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference is going to be in Philadelphia from June 7th through June 9th. We hope you'll join us. It's going to be a marvelous conference, to be sure. And then in October, the National Family Engagement Summit, which is co-hosted by NAFSCI and Successful Innovations, is going to be from October 9th through October 13th in Kansas City, Missouri. So we hope you will join us. With that, let's move on to the subject matter of today. As many of you know, this is about California's Community Engagement Initiative. In the meantime, California was charting its own path, approaching family engagement from a bottom-up, top-down approach. This is the story we want to lift up today, the story of California's Community Engagement Initiative, which launched in 2018 as a result of a bold move by then Governor Jerry Brown to change how the state funds schools with a greater focus on equity. As a result of this new local control formula, or LCFF as it's known in California, schools have greater flexibility and greater authority over resources. And as a requirement, districts must adopt a local control accountability plan, or the LCAP, which must be shaped by the local community, including parents and students. There's a link in the chat on LCFF, LCAP, so that you can learn more. What we will learn from our speakers today is how, as a result of LCFF and LCAPs, the larger advocacy community and the state stepped in to support districts to effectively and authentically engage families, students, and community. We will hear the story of how bright spot districts help shape the peer-to-peer learning and leading model that is today what defines the Community Engagement Initiative. We will also explore what lessons have been learned along the way and the tools that are being developed to measure progress and impact. I'm excited about this conversation and all that we'll learn together as we all in each of our states across the nation keep illuminating the power of family, student, and community engagement towards student success. But let's get started. I'd like to invite my panelists to show themselves on camera and unmute themselves. Okay, I think everyone is with us. First,
Vito,
yes.
just, Robin is going to be joining us. She just had another engagement, but I'm sure she'll join us at some point.
Marvelous. If we could, why don't we just start with, I know we have bios and we've had an introduction, but why don't you each briefly introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'm Yolie Flores, and I'm president and CEO of Families in Schools, and thrilled to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Yolie.
I'm also one of the 3 state agency leads that are part of what CEI is, as you'll learn more as we get into the conversation about our roles.
Thank you. Jan?
Thanks, Vito. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jan Gustafson-Corea. I am the CEO for the California Association for Bilingual Education, the second of the 3 lead agency partners, along with our state partner, the California Collaborative for Educational Equity. And really pleased to be with you here in this setting today to share some of the really promising and uplifting work we're doing here in California. Great to be with you all from across the nation.
Thank you, Jan. Stephen?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Sterling Mitchell, Assistant Director for Community Engagement in the California State System of Support at the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, where we co-lead the Community Engagement Initiative in partnership with our friends from Families in Schools, California Association for Bilingual Education, and San Bernardino County of Superintendent of Schools. And so thank you guys for coming to learn a little bit about the California story today.
Wonderful. And I think Robin will be with us shortly. So let's move right into some of the questions. To Stephen and Yolie, what are the origins of CEI from a policy and community standpoint?
Sure. Thanks, Vito. I'll get this question started and then I'll hand it over to Yolie. But what we believe is unique about the California experience is that unlike many other places where there was legislations and laws and legal battles around improving engagement, our governor at the time and our educational leaders were proactive and decided that it was a strategy that would improve California. And so, as you mentioned in our bio, the local control funding formula, realizing that California is a diverse state. We have school districts that are as small as 7, 8, 9, 10 students in our rural areas, and school districts in Los Angeles that have millions of students. And so realizing that legislation from the state doesn't live well in all of our communities. And so knowing that local communities know their local needs and know what their families needs, what their students needs. And so with LCFF really putting the onus on local communities to help create equity and resources, equity and access, and equity and the ability for students to achieve. And so as we'll talk through today, you'll realize that community engagement is a priority in the state of California. It's part of our belief systems, our values, and the investment of state leaders. And I'll hand it over to Yolie.
Thank you, Stephen.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I'll take us a little bit back to 2017-ish. So CI really was born out of a 2017, 2018, around that time frame, grassroots effort that was led by 19 advocacy organizations from across California, including families and schools. This group was called the Defend and Mend Coalition, and I'll put a link in the chat related to this particular coalition. Together, in that time, this group met with education leaders, including the California State Board of Education, to begin to talk about how to better support districts in achieving what was called out in the LCAP process. Specifically, they were asking the board to address the uneven engagement of families across LEAs and reminding the California State Board of Education that parent engagement was one of the 8 key LCAP priorities that districts must meet. So to make the case, the coalition developed a powerful root cause analysis to help the board understand why districts were likely not meeting this priority, explaining what was underneath the historical lack of engagement of families in their children's education. This analysis became known as the 6 root causes, which we'll talk about a little later. What's important to note here is that hundreds of parents were part of this effort, many making the trip to Sacramento to testify before the state board. This showing of parents had a huge impact. Board members shared that they'd never had this many parents attend a State Board of Education meeting before on any other issue. So in large part, this advocacy effort and the understanding of the 6 root causes, California, as Stephen said, really becoming much more conscious about the power of community engagement. That was all essentially what led to the initial investment of $13 million by the legislature, which focused on creating the Community Engagement Initiative, an effort to help build the capacity of school districts, we call them LEAs, to authentically engage families, students, and communities in the LCAP process, but even beyond. So yeah, CEI, the origins of CEI was actually a community-led mobilization effort. So I'll turn it back to you, Vito.
Thank you, Yolie. Jan, if you could explain structurally how this initiative came together and the foundational pieces.
Sure, thanks, Vito. So, as that process went forward, as Yolie and Stephen were describing, and after our legislature did pass this statute for the Community Engagement Initiative, it then at that place started taking a different set of legs and really moving forward to an application process, an RFP, putting out there to interested parties. And I think that's when it caught even broader attention than what was done initially by the group that Yolie was mentioning. And I think, California traditionally, we are a very strong advocacy, policy-oriented state. We are many organizations that work on behalf of our student needs in many different areas of education. And in the area of parent and family engagement, that's really a rich field. So when the RFP came out, it caught our attention at CABE. CABE is an educational nonprofit dedicated to a vision of biliteracy and multicultural competency and educational equity for all. So we've always had our lens for almost 5 decades now on bilingual education and serving and supporting bilingual and immigrant families and students that come from diverse backgrounds. We started then looking for our common partners, those that we have had the relationships with. And we have had many relationships through formal settings like the perks and I3 grants and those types of things, and also other ways throughout our state as a really strong organizational partner here in California. So we obviously started looking for relationships. We turned it into a structure we have in California with our county offices. Each of our counties in California has a county office of education, and the grant, the proposal asks for a lead LEA, as Yolie mentioned, and the LEA could be a county office or a district. We turned to San Bernardino, great leadership under Superintendent Ted Alejandre, Robin McIver-Brown, who'll be joining us shortly, as well as many other partners there. And as we started talking with San Bernardino also started talking with families and schools And a really kind of unique collaboration came forward with two nonprofit organizations working with the County Office of Education, applying to a state agency that became a key partner in this work as well to form this collaboration. So I think we felt that we really brought the expertise, especially around family and parent engagement. And I think one thing this initiative has done for all of us is really stretch our thinking about community engagement and what that means. It of course includes our families and students, but it also broadens out, of course, to our educational partners, teachers, administrators, and then our community partners as well. So this, I think that's been one of our foundational pieces to even kind of take a look at that definition of community engagement. Default, we went to families and parents, but we know it's much broader than that. In California, as well, as we started working together and bringing our ideations together, our visions together, because we were 3, then 4 unique organizations that had to kind of bring these pieces and integrate them together. We did start looking at some of those common pieces. As Yolie mentioned, we have the LCFF, the Local Control Funding Formula, and that brought forth a focus on parent and family and community engagement. And one of our priorities within the LCFF is priority 3. And there was then another offshoot of a group that CABI was a part of, and Families and Schools and others, to work on a reflection tool to help our districts and schools think about community and family engagement as they worked on their plan that aligns to the LCFF. So that was really key to get the parent and family and community voice in those school plans. Because if it's not in your LCFF or your LCAP, as we call the plan, it really wasn't going to happen. Then just a couple other things. I think, there were a few other tools or resources in the state that really became a part of at least the vision for some of us that we brought forward. We have a roadmap for our English learner population. We call it the English Learner Roadmap. We have a really close focus on diversity and equity in our state. And we've had state superintendents that have really raised the flag on that and really uplifted our call to really meet the needs of our students and families of diverse backgrounds. We brought in the community learning theory by Dr. Roberto Vargas and the Homeschool Community Connection. We brought in the Funds of Knowledge research by Luis Moll and others who really have been a foundation of our work in parent, family, and community engagement. The dual capacity framework, of course, and then again, that real focus on equity. And I think that's the one thing I'll close this section of, is that it really stretched us to think about what is our definition of community engagement. As I mentioned, we all kind of entered in different ways with that. And after a real, pretty intense and kind of dynamic process, we've come to a definition, which is still an evolving definition. But I'll share that with you because we tried to really, I think, capture the different visions and voices that we all were bringing from our different entities and the communities that we serve and that we have just a great advantage of working with. So the definition we've come up with so far is that community engagement is authentic partnerships among students, families, districts, and communities that nurture relationships, build trust, ensure cultural, racial, and linguistic equity, and lead to transformative student outcomes. So I think that just really kind of gives a great idea of the sense of the foundation. You can imagine 4 entities coming together and working together and then building it out, as you'll be hearing about in a little while. It's been a real act of active collaboration, of real partnership. And again, even though we have all this knowledge, it's really the relationships that make the difference.
Thanks so much, Jan. Yolie, in reflecting on the early stages, what helped frame this work?
So I mentioned earlier that when the Men and Defend Coalition came to the state board, it really did a thorough analysis of trying to understand, and not just for the State Board of Education, but I think in general, we all needed to begin to be honest with ourselves and understand what was getting in the way. Mm-hmm. Why aren't school systems authentically engaging family, students, and communities? And so that's how these 6 root causes came to be, as a way of really understanding and unpacking. And then ultimately, when you hear about the work of the districts, how to take those 6 root causes to develop a problem of practice. Mm-hmm. But let me just share what those were. And there are 6, as I said. So one is the lack of belief that the system's success is critically dependent on its relationships with students and families. And part of that is, you know, Dr. Karen Mapp talks a lot about this in schools of preparation for teachers, for administrators. It hasn't been part of the learning. So there's not always the knowledge or the awareness that family engagement matters deeply for student engagement. There are other sub causes, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to rattle off the other 5 and then maybe touch on one sub root cause. The second is then a lack of belief in students and families as experts. And some of those sub root causes might be fear of bad decisions or a lack of investment in student and family training and leadership development. But also fear of maybe too many student family interest groups. So lots of reasons around fear. The third 6 root cause is the lack of committed and consistent districts and school leaders. That might be because of lack of training. We talked about that earlier, lack of training for key skills that are necessary for engagement, like relationship building, facilitation, empathy, deep listening, etc. The fourth root cause is a lack of committed and consistent district and school leaders. At best, this might be a little bit of ambivalence around sharing power. At worst, it's just a natural human resistance, perhaps, to share power. The fifth root cause is lack of inclusivity based on race and culture. A key sub cause of that is unconscious or conscious bias. Maybe families and students who have cultural differences around challenging authority. The sixth root cause is the systems and tools are not made to be community friendly. So oftentimes there's jargon, education speak, there's lack of quality language translation, there's lack of understanding of what community friendly, family friendly is. So those 6 root causes they really underpinned a lot of the learning toward, and you really taking those with the dual capacity framework, by the way, and aligning how does all this fit as we see and explore the competencies, for example, within the dual capacity framework. And those 2 then led to districts being able to identify their problem of practice and begin to work toward the problem of practice. So Stephen, I don't know if you want to add to that, but if you do, if I've left anything out, please jump in.
No, Yolie, thank you. And so as Yolie shared, the 6 core root causes have been fundamental because it gives you a frame and a vocabulary and a language. And so as our districts that we work with across the state have very different local contexts, this one document allowed for them to talk across districts. And so when they were developing problem of practices, they had these 6 core root areas where they could share best practices, share strategies, share their where they needed growth. And it gave us an ability to really create a space for that peer-to-peer learning, which we'll talk about later.
You know, Stephen, if I can add on to that, Vito, if it's okay.
Sure, absolutely. Please.
I think I love what Stephen shared because it really created that conversation, that dialogue, and looking at the best practices and really calling that out. And it's really called to us when you look at the 6 core root causes, you'll see them written more with kind of like what's lacking, what's not there. And we are really challenged to kind of through that assets-based idea, what does it really look like? And, you know, how could we actually kind of turn those on their side or on their heads and really create those statements of what that positive reflection could be as well. So this practice has really kind of challenged us to look deep in the districts we've worked with as well, and then start really acknowledging, well, what are those assets-based statements we can make around the core causes of really effective community engagement as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. And Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Can you talk about the mindset and approach around CEI?
Sure. Well, I'm sorry for being tardy. So thank you for all those who are on this particular call webinar. So
Actually, your timing was impeccable. It was your question here, so you came on just in time. Perfect.
the mindset around CEI is to really connect to the work and the larger initiatives around the state of California. And not only in the state of California, but I know in many different states, there are large initiatives. And one of the crux of the CEI is to figure out how we engage all of our, not only our families and our community partners, but really deepen student voice. And then also, of course, internal connections within the district, and also other external partners, faith-based organizations, and a variety of other people. But I think that mindset was to ensure that we began to really engage families, parents, and students in the conversation around larger initiatives to help impact student outcomes. There is no state who doesn't want their kids to succeed. Right. And everybody is looking for ways in order to figure out how we can move forward. How can we close achievement gaps? And so community engagement is a way in which we do that basically through engaging the community. And it's a harder lens for districts to actually get going. Some people think it's easy, but it is a little bit more trickier because it's not as clearly and neatly defined. It has an intentionality behind it that you don't always learn in your administrative level coursework. It has a compassion and a heart and a skill to build relationships that are really critical in order to infuse into a district system to impact the mindsets and change the views in which communities should come to the table to make decisions in the best interest of the students. And so California has really used this to connect with their local control accountability plan and larger initiatives like their community schools initiatives, their expanded learning after school programs initiatives, and so many others that we put in place after the pandemic to help support the students with the highest needs.
Thank you, Robin. And Stephen, Robin answered some of this, but if you want to just add to it, how does this address issues local education agencies are facing?
Well, yeah, thank you, Robin, for laying the groundwork and giving the larger context. I think for the CEI, the larger sort of reframing of California with the LCAP, open space for fertile soil to do things different. And so the statute that guides the CEI, the legislation that created it, came out of the voice of activists and community partners. And so in our language, it explains who should be at the table with us. And so it's very clear and specific that we need district leadership, county office leadership, students, families, parents, community partners, certificated staff, classified staff. And in many cases, prior to joining the CEI, many districts didn't realize or didn't see the value in having all of those voices at the table. And so this created space and opportunity for districts who were excelling and doing great work and districts who were just entering into this work to really reflect on whose voices were at the table, whose voices were missing. And as Jan shared earlier, we talk about equity in California, creating the opportunities so that everyone can be a part of transforming their local context. The one thing that's key to the LCAP that we haven't mentioned and to the CEI, it really is about decision-making in your local context. And so it's not just in the past, parents sign off of here's a piece of paper, sign off. It's like, no, we need your voices. We need you present to make decisions that are going to transform your local community.
Thank you, Stephen. Jan, so we've celebrated the vision and the innovativeness of this initiative. If you could tell us what some of the problems of practice have been and how have they been addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Vito. You know, it's really taking that policy and putting it into practice. I mean, that's really, I think a part that's really key to the work we do. Practice impacts policy. Policy has to impact practice as well. And you have to see it happen on the ground with that really immense and just really, I think, really impactful vision that came forward. What does it really look like? And of course, it's our districts, it's our schools, it's our communities that are really facing that on the ground level. So the process that we use through different tools and resources, we brought our districts through it. And remember, this was all pretty much during COVID, all right? We started it, live, and then we moved into our online work as well together, and really had an opportunity for them to create different structures and different frameworks for them to actually look at their own district. And again, these were teams that brought, district leadership, site leadership, teachers, maybe classified staff from a school site, parents and families, and student voice. And I will share that at first, it was probably hard for districts and schools to really impactfully involve their parents and their student voice in this work initially. And that has really grown. That's, I think, one real strength and growth that we've seen through this. And then as they would discuss and collaborate together, there were some other key components that we had to make sure we had in place. We had to make sure we had translation and interpretation. We had to make sure we had structures so that parents and students even had a voice at the table, and then brought them through this process of the problem of practice. And if you're familiar with this process, the problem of practice really calls on a group of whoever you're working with, whether it's a district, a site, a community, whoever that is, to really take a look at a specific issue that they want to hone in on. And there's a lot of ideations, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of sharing together and coming together on what that one specific issue might be. It's not their only issue, but it's the one that they're going to focus on. And they want to make sure that that issue is connected to all team members. So it's not just something that impacts, maybe a site leader or a teacher or, whoever it might be, but it's something that all can have input on and all are impacted on as well. And then that problem of practice has to be something that can create action and have a realistic piece to it. So again, it's not just policy, but it's the practice. What practice could we put in place to really address that issue that we're facing? And how do we move towards solutions, toward ideations, towards innovations, to really thinking of how to move that forward? It has to be something measurable, something that they can see, that they can feel is really happening, and then really connects to their broader strategy around improvement, whether it's in their LCAP, their other school site plans that are required to do the different requirements we have in California. We know you have others in your states as well. So we took our groups through different processes and really learned how to use our different tools on Zoom really effectively. And we have great notes from those times and places when our groups would go into their Zoom rooms. They would do a lot of ideations, a lot of great note taking, looking at their different actions, and then actually commenting on each other's. If my group came up with a problem of practice, well, what does another district think of that, and what kind of peer comments are made too to help guide them in the refinement of their problems of practice. So I'll just give you an example of a few of them, and then I think later on in the discussion I'm going to share some of the kind of really promising things that we saw come out of the groups. But one district from Southern California talked about the impact of COVID. So this was right when COVID was probably in its first months, and there had been really rampant unemployment, and it was a district that was a low-income district anyway, but they were feeling that even more. There were mental health issues and increased disengagement by students and families. So that was a problem of practice that they took through that process then. What was connected, what were some actionable steps, what could be measurable, and then how did it impact the whole system. Another problem of practice was that their community was struggling to manage the social and emotional impacts of COVID. So distance learning was really an issue for them. The health crisis, the employment crisis. Another problem of practice was embracing diversity. So this district was really grappling with how do we really value the diverse backgrounds that our families, our students, and our educators bring together, and then how to build that positive school culture. And I think that was existing, it wasn't just a COVID issue, that was something that they had been experiencing and really wanted to really hone in on, and then see its impact across the school community around students' academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs, and then outcomes, of course, as well. Another district really wanted to engage their communities and make sure that they were getting voice in different languages and cultures as well. So, as we took our districts through this, they really, and this was a practice that really, I think, as we talked with our leaders, really brought them together as a community, because it was sitting around the table. Sometimes, depending where we're at in the pandemic, they might be in the same room, sitting around a table with their masks on, but able to communicate, still socially distanced. Sometimes they were there via Zoom as well, but they had a chance for dialogue. And they had a chance for really creating that space to be open and honest with each other and listen and come up with the steps they thought could really approach, not always resolve or find the answer, quote unquote, but move them together as a group to start making steps to really address that issue. And so just a couple examples off from here. The one district that really talked about some of the issues around the social emotional impact, the health impact. Another program has come out of California, similar to our name, called the Community Schools Program, and that's done nationally as well. And so some of our districts have really reached out to take a look at those wraparound services and how can they take this work they've done through community engagement and wrap that into that approach as well. So we'll go into some more details a bit later and some other really great examples, but it was just so interesting to see how our districts took this process, brought it to their current reality, and COVID, of course, created some really interesting dynamics, but tied it to where they were coming from. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to say it's all because of COVID. Many of these things were things that had come from before, but potentially got elevated or escalated because of the pandemic and the circumstances. And then we had the kind of leaders, especially in our very first cohort, that really were ready to roll up their sleeves and really take a look at this. Leaders from the community, leaders from our students, leaders from our educational agencies to come together to really take a look at steps they would take to move forward and address these issues.
Thank you so much. Robin.
Can I just say that one of the
Sure.
important pieces here, I think it's important for the audience to learn this from us, is for districts to really be able to convey and share, they have to be vulnerable. And the way that the space was created for them to be encouraged to be vulnerable was incredibly powerful, which is what leads folks to finally get to a solution when there is actually that kind of safe space that allows you to confront some of the biggest challenges and have some courageous conversations. And that's been so key to the learning and the leading and the way that these districts have done this peer-to-peer engagement with each other.
Thank you for that, Yolie. Actually, it's a great segue. Robin, Yolie talked about the dual capacity framework, and what's profoundly important about the dual capacity framework is relational trust, right? So if you have relational trust, then you can feel vulnerable or certainly take the chance to exhibit that vulnerability. But if you don't have relational trust, it's kind of difficult to do that. And so often that's the greatest challenge. But that being the case, I'd like to dig into the foundational frameworks that CEI uses. Can you share some examples?
Well, one, as we probably talked about before, is our dual capacity building framework, the work of Dr. Karen Mapp from Harvard. And that is one that really kind of sets the stage for us, because that looks at the educators and the families and what it looks like when we are not on the right track, and then how do basically we move through this continuum to become eventually partners in this work. So the dual capacity framework is a lens in which we is foundational to our work. Well, you've heard about conocimiento, probably. I'm late to the table today, but conocimiento is our way in which we build that trusting foundational through the work of Dr. Roberto Vargas. And how are we looking at our communities and working together and building community trust? And then we also, our foundation around community learning theory, just in general, what does that mean? And so these are foundational pieces or frameworks that we use. But one that, two that we spoke about, one just a moment ago when Jan was talking about the problem of practice, we're really grounding and rooting our work in improvement science. And that is what many of you know, that particular framework. We follow the Carnegie Foundation model, and improvement science, really looking at data, root cause analysis, but really also thinking about the ladder of inference. Sometimes you've heard go slow to go fast, not moving up the rungs of the ladder too fast with assumptions or biases, so that we can really take time to define the problem based on data, based on needs assessment. So improvement science is a grounding piece that really connects our districts to really thinking about what is their problem. It's not just the gut feeling, it's not just someone throwing things out, but how do they come to consensus around defining their problem? And then going through those steps, and many of you have heard about, the fishbone activity, looking at that, looking at root cause analysis, and just really using that actual framework to ground our work. There are some other frameworks that we're using now in California, the community schools framework, really looking at the 4 different pillars that we're focusing on, one being community engagement, one leadership, one expanded learning opportunities, and then one really just dealing with rigorous academics. And so those frameworks are all mixing together to really provide strong foundation to how we are intentionally guiding our districts, because this is not a top-down approach. This is really almost a grassroots. We have districts who are willing to come to the table to say, I want to get better at doing this work. And can you help me? And then this is how we use our guiding frameworks to actually create and design the space in which we move and do this work. And so I think I'll leave it at that in terms of those are the main frameworks that we're using, amongst some others.
Thank you, Robin. Yolie, what lessons have you learned from the first 4 years of this initiative?
I'll talk about a few, but I'll invite my colleagues to share any additional lessons learned. One is that the peer-to-peer, especially in-person model, is not always as effective for small rural school districts. For some, they're very, very small districts, maybe 200 people, might work in this district-wide. So sending your team to attend a peer-to-peer learning engagement session for within the CI process might not be very feasible. So we're really, now thinking through how do we reach those smaller communities, those smaller school districts, those that might just not be able to participate, but they want to. Mm-hmm. So that has been a big lesson, is to think about this not as a one size fits all kind of model, but thinking about ways that we can bring all districts, big or small, to be part of this leading and learning process. Jan mentioned this earlier, but as I was talking about the 6 root causes, Jan mentioned that we had been looking at them, and as I described them, you saw that they were all in the negative. What's lacking, the fear, what, all of the things that are getting in the way. And we want to be able to, moving forward, sort of reverse that, again, anchoring with the dual capacity framework and moving that into the positive. What would it look like? And so when we think about the 4 C's within the dual capacity framework, and I know there's a visual that was just put in the chat that you can peek at and see what the 4 C's are, but basically they're the competencies that we're looking for. That might move us from how we originally have been looking at the 6 root causes to flip it on its head in a positive manner.
Thank you for that. And so we really only have time for 2 more questions, and I'm going to open this up to anyone who wants to answer this. What has this work meant for families and for students, and for districts who now see the value of family, student, and community engagement? Who'd like to address that?
Vita, I'll jump in with an example. I think of one of our districts kind of on our coastal area, Central Coast, Oxnard, California. a community, high migrant student population, high number of Latino, English learner, low income, farm worker community. And that district came to us with good leadership and good vision on parent family engagement. They came as they went through their problem of practice, and it helped them deepen it. Although they still have lots of good work to do, they felt like they were providing their services in Spanish. They were reaching out to their Latino community. They had a pretty good grasp on that. What this process allowed them to do, though, was to look broader amongst their other communities, especially highlighted through COVID, but in other ways as well, and started really seeing that they have a very strong, small but strong African-American community that they were not reaching out to, and finding ways to do so, and bringing the right tools and resources and personnel together to really invite and engage families of African-American background into the whole process in the school community. They also have a strong Mixteco population from Southern Mexico. And again, not just lumping them into, well, there are Latino students, they must speak Spanish. They didn't. And so finding the resources and tools and finding the ways to reach out to these families and giving them an equitable voice in the process, not just providing them with things, but saying, we need your voice, we need your perspective, come into the dialogue. So I think one of the things that our schools has gotten out of this is a chance to really dig deep together and think through these parts, the issues that they're dealing with, and saying, how can we really make a difference? And we have many, many stories of how they're sharing and showing the difference that they're making for their students and families. So it gave them a space to really dialogue together and then make action happen. But it has to be continuous, doesn't it? It's not just an end job. It's something that continues going on and on.
Thank you for that. And last question for our panelists, for anyone who wants to answer, for communities and states who believe in this approach, what is your advice and how to leverage existing community work to grow and scale in similar ways to California? Who wants to answer that?
Well, I'll lead off and then pass it to Yolie. I think hopefully what you've heard from our story is that it involved bringing various educational partners to the table. It can't be a top up and bottom down. It has to be both a yes and so having leaders across the state who see the value in the work and want to invest in it, having leaders at the county level who see the value of the work and want to continue to grow it, having superintendents, school board members, family, students, all part of creating your new normal and your solution for transforming your community.
Yeah, I think I would just add in terms of this top-down, bottom-up approach is that, it's important for a state in terms of the top-down to provide the resources to be intentional and to provide the resources for this kind of work to happen. It doesn't just happen. You need an umbrella entity. You need the resources to bring districts in and to spend the time to learn and to engage with one another. And then you need to create the spaces, we've talked a lot about this, for there to be vulnerable conversations, courageous conversations. And so it's in the facilitation of how we've been bringing districts. We have now 3 cohorts of districts. We started with five or six bright spots. But it's really, how do you create the conditions where districts can be vulnerable and to share and express what it is that they want to learn and how they're going to get there together.
Thank you for that. I so appreciate the top-down, bottom-up approach, and leadership matters. And so I actually just left the American Association of School Administrators, who had a fellowship, a summit for superintendents on family engagement. We had 81 superintendents or the representatives that were in New Orleans last week who have really made this a priority. So this is kind of just speaks to, I think, the momentum in this work. And so with that, thank you to our panelists, and I'd like to invite our commentators.
Oh, wait, Vito, before we go into the commentators, we just wanted to wrap this up with that 3-minute video. Is that okay?
Absolutely, please.
All right, here we go.
I think people are in a mode where it's like, I'm just in LCAP season. I did a parent survey, I did a student survey. here are the results. It's like, there's so much more that we might be able to do. There's Harvard research that shows that one of the best indicators for whether a student's successful is the frequency of eating at a dinner table together as a family, right? And so I think the temptation to get jaded a little bit and roll your eyes at things like community engagement and LCAP, and like, what if the thing that we're rolling our eyes about is the actual thing that is going to deliver on that California promise?
What it's brought to me is both a little bit of head and heart. It's re-energized me. I have seen from a head perspective some of the most innovative ideas, the types of things they're doing to bring in families and to be culturally relevant, to be able to listen to who they're serving. And we have schools that have had entire groups of people immigrate into their district and how they've had to shift suddenly. It's incredible, the innovative and thoughtful things that they're doing. And from a heart perspective, one of the things I love most is about the way that they're engaging is through service just to your fellow man, and about the heart behind that, and the relational way that they're working to engage, not just inviting them to our table and our process, but truly in a relational way, trying to be a part of what's happening for them and their family and their community.
And when I go to community engagement initiative meetings and I see practitioners being inclusive, I see East Side, for example, East Side shared in their problem of practice, they had crazy amount of fights happening. And then they institute a student senate and drastic reduction. And I walked away in my notes, you treat students like they can't be trusted, they will prove to be untrustworthy. Right? So as we empower students and give them things like student senate, help students be part of our dress codes, right? So we're able to come back to Shasta County and just have conversations, share a couple of slides, again, planting seeds. We're talking about vulnerable spaces where people are sharing out, like, here is what it was before we got in and did some work. It's really important that we make sure that community engagement, that we're all in, and that it's authentic and that it's sincere, and the best way to do that, jump in and hang out with people that are practitioners. Those districts in cohort 1, cohort 2 have been so powerful in stepping in and being vulnerable and saying, hey, we're working on this. And the idea of, I've figured something out and I want to share it, like, that's why we're on the call. I saw a slide that I still share to this day of shifting from transactional community engagement to relational community engagement. And you can feel the difference, right? I'm not talking about bake sales. I'm not talking about jogathons. We're talking about sitting on people's couches and talking to them about dreams for their children. That the Community Engagement Initiative empowers us to have a vision of what that engagement could be, what it could look like, and it gives us tools. Maya Angelou, know better, do better. And that's what, for me, community engagement has been.
That was outstanding. I'd like to invite I'd like to thank our panelists and invite our commentators to join us. You could turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And Eddie and Yolanda, do you want to just briefly introduce yourselves?
Yes, my name is Yolanda Brown, and I am representing Pontiac Academy for Excellence in Pontiac, Michigan, and also Northridge Academy in Flint, Michigan.
Welcome. Eddie.
Good. I'm Eddie Cohen. I'm the president of the Institute for Educational Leadership. I started my career off at Equal Justice Initiative. I'm a former professor. I've worked at the district level, teacher, and most importantly, I'm a parent active in my 3-year-old and 7-year-old school.
Thank you both for being with us. So first question, and both or either feel free to address it. What aspects of this initiative stood out to you?
Eddie, you can go ahead and then I'll go after you.
Yeah, sure. You know, listening to a lot of the panelists, I think the balance of accountability, funding, and support has really given local communities more flexibility to realize strategies that optimally support local contexts. You know, last week we were in the meeting in the Southeast and Mississippi, and it's interesting to juxtapose sometimes the problems of different locales. But one, I think Steve mentioned this earlier, that you have to give credit. Sometimes you have to stop and appreciate the blessings that you have. It's really been exceptional leadership in California and continuous organizing, right? So I don't want folks to take that for granted. To have the social capital and to build an audience that is open to the response is impressive in itself. I can give you examples of several locales where there's hostility. We're seeing that in Tennessee around gun control in schools, right? There was real thoughtfulness that I think about baking in equity on the front end, which is important. And as you could hear from some of the panelists, I think implementation is an iterative process, right? It's bound with complications, with details. Anytime you have any big initiative, policy isn't known for its flexibility, I would say that. It's known for its rigidity. The 6 root causes is on point. I think it allows folks to take a quick inflection point, a quick self-assessment. And we do have, most of the big initiatives are all aspirational, and it's not the sort of critical lens of here are the 6 symptoms that you have. So those are a few things that stood out to me.
Thank you, Eddie. Yolanda, how about you?
Yeah, so I see the flexibility in this. It's really impressive because you guys have come together and really you're fixing a problem that so many can't seem to do. So you guys have come together and you figured out a way. You're getting the resources for this, and it's great. It's great. And I really would like to talk to someone after this because you guys have really come together, and it's impeccable. It's impeccable.
What are your thoughts on the local control funding formula?
You want me to go first, Yolanda?
Go ahead. I've got my notes here.
Yeah, lots of places have tried or, to create in some contexts an even playing field in terms of formulas. I think about Denver Public Schools, they have tried a lot of bond and mill initiatives that have been tied to weighted funding formulas, right? And they sort of had to do a public campaign to sell it. DC Public Schools here where I live had a similar initiative. I believe you all are familiar with Arlene Ackerman around weighted student formulas, and she brought that same thing to San Francisco. Hawaii is actually doing something similar for 2 high need groups, students experiencing homelessness and ELLs. They've done it since 2006. And even Wake County, similar things, sort of the baseline is the state formula, and they're doing local tax increases to supplement. But I think it takes a real public education campaign to be able to do that. And again, that leaves it at the whims of the taxpayer. And if you can sort of sell the idea of equity and proper distribution of funding.
And you would think if it can be done in the largest state in our country, it should be able to be done just about any place else, right?
Right.
And with that, can you reflect on the applicability of this model outside of California? What elements are more widely applicable versus less so? Either of you.
Can we go back to the funding?
Sure.
So I work at charter schools, and so we don't get the funding that the regular or the traditional public schools get. So a lot of what we do as it relates to family engagement, we have to be creative with our actions. And so I just like to say that having to be creative makes you a little more aware of ways in which to engage without having to use as much money. So here in Michigan, we're making things work where I'm from without the same process that you guys are doing with less money, but we're making it work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly, districts having more control over their funding versus state control is based on a working assumption that really needs to be interrogated, kind of like principals in certain schools getting more autonomy being based on the assumption that they know what to do that's in the best interest of students. I think autonomy depends on the leader, the efficacy, right? I think, but to your direct question, things that are being accepted more, in the 400 communities that we work in, students living with disabilities, seems to be on the horizon, more neurodiverse students. I think there's a greater acceptance of social emotional learning, looking at the current context of issues right now. There are challenges around equity and racial equity. Even when you pass the legal hurdles, a lot of districts very cleverly use proxies for racial equity because there are legal constraints. It is hard to get past the winners and losers mindsets in some locales. And I think the current environment that we live in may get worse before it actually gets better.
Yeah. Yolanda, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to know, as it relates to building the trust factor, I think you guys were saying earlier, what are some of the ways that you build the relational trust that you were speaking of earlier, especially in the rural areas?
Yolie, do you want to take that question?
I'll give it a shot. My colleagues have been at CI much longer than I have, but what I know to be true is that to launch CEI, we identified through lots of interviewing and focus groups and talking to districts, some of the bright spots districts across the state that would begin as the first cohort. And because those districts had already gone through lots of process to get to a place where they were a bright spot, they helped, I think, set the stage for how to engage the next cohort, and allowing for that when they were able to share what they went through, their problem of practice, what's been a challenge and a barrier. Hearing them, I think, allows for others to then feel like it's a safe environment to really talk about their problem of practice. And I've seen that now with the next cohort. So now we're at the third cohort, about to start the fourth cohort. But Stephen and Jan and Robin might have more explicit.
I'll tap in. Oh, thanks, Yolie. I'll tap in and then pass it over to Jan and Robin. But one thing that we mentioned is the work of Dr. Roberto Vargas and the conocimiento. And so leading with relationship, we open all of our meetings with the relationship builder. And it's more than an icebreaker, and it's more than what's your favorite color. It really is, how are you emotionally, physically coming into this space? And throughout the pandemic, by default, based on all of our collaborative partners, we created a therapeutic learning space for adults, and we helped folks safe through what was unknown at the time. And then one thing too is that we, as Yolie said, when we recruited our first cohort of leaders, we made sure that we had a large urban, a small rural, a suburban, one that served English language learners, one that served English language learners that weren't Spanish speakers, and then we partnered with our what we call geographic lead agency, which represents the top third of our state counties and rural, and they have been right alongside with us filtering. Here are the learnings that can happen in a large urban. Here's how you need to tweak them, or here's how you need to adjust them to meet the needs of the small rurals.
Thank you, Stephen. And Jan, anything to add?
Well, just to tap into that a little bit too, I think as building off of what both Stephen and Yolie have shared, is another part of that practice as we work with these diverse school and district communities is looking at peer-like groups. So whether I'm from a large urban area or a small rural, I'm still a parent, I'm still a student, I'm still a teacher, an educator, what have you. And so we bring those groups together to also have deeper conversations, and using the kind of reflective conversations that aren't just surfacey, but helps bring out voice and perspective and shows the value. Basing on that research of Louis Small, the funds of knowledge. We each come with so much knowledge and experience, but we have to make sure that people feel comfortable sharing that knowledge, whatever table that they're at. And so I think, building on the conocimiento, the relational aspect, and then creating the spaces for those discussions to happen, and then the sharing across those systems as well. So we have put a lot of time and emphasis into that. And we are seeing the benefits, the impact of that.
Thank you, Jan. And last question to our commentators. What do you see as the main takeaways from learning about this initiative?
Yeah, for me, it's that student leaders fought for and won official representation on each district's LCAP. is a learning. I know all of this was pre-pandemic, but it's something of note that we should call out. I love the focus on how there are three clear buckets, right? The conditions of learning, pupil outcomes, and engagement. It's a three-legged stool. And I think about current problems around the country, chronic absenteeism, the relationship between those three is clear, both from a student perspective and from the teacher pipeline. Takeaways, that last bucket, 87% of students' waking hours, we have to remember, are outside of schools. And IEL, we run the Coalition for Community Schools. So collaboration is key. I think, and there's someone put in the chat, I was reading, some great examples of that. There are plenty, there's Rise Colorado. I think there are family diners that the Coalition for Community Schools doing. I would encourage folks on this call. A webinar will not do it, is to go into spaces. The conference that this entity hosts is great. Vito's is great. Ours in Philadelphia will invite you, 3,500 folks from across the country really learning. So plug into something local or nationally that you can really learn from. But yeah, this was just an excellent conversation. And I think should really be proud as California is not perfect, but to really leading the rest of the nation.
Thank you, Eddie. Yolanda.
Yeah, so I just like to say that maintaining the meaningful engagement with the families that you guys work with, and then being inclusive. Here we have the issue with the water crisis in Flint. And just prior to that, instead of having, and I think I heard that on the film, instead of just having a meeting with coffee and cookies, a lot of what I do when I have the meetings, what I'll do is I'll have a full community health fair, because I know that in that community, this is what is needed. Expungement clinics, because there are a large community of kids who are coming from homes with family members with criminal records. So these are things that actually bring people to the school, the families to the school, and then they understand that we care about the whole child, about the family. And so those things really, it's brought us together. And so meaningful engagement is very important, and also being inclusive of everyone.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Eddie. And now we're going to open it up to the audience, and Hattie, take it away.
Thank you, everyone, for all of your contributions. So we have a few questions in the Q&A. I'm going to start with one from Cristina Gonzalez. How do we engage parents to see themselves as experts and decision makers, particularly when it comes to LCAP as part of their school and building relationships with teachers and advocates across their districts? How do we set up parents for success and meaningful engagement? Stephen, I was going to tee this off for you, but anybody's welcome to jump in.
Sure, I'll kick it off and then hand it over to my peers, but it really is about capacity building. In the field of education, we speak educationese. And so if you just drop parents and students in a room and speak educationese, you won't really build that skill for them. And so it's being thoughtful, creating spaces for pre-learning before you bring them to the meeting, having glossaries, having trainings that are specific to how do you read an LCAP? How do you provide input? How do you provide feedback? And so we haven't had a chance to talk about some of our districts who are doing great work, but one of our partners down in San Diego County has a whole series of training specific to how to give your best input, how to be best involved, with tons of pre-meetings and a meeting cycle, so that parents just don't land in the room and become sort of ornamental to an entire process. They really build their skills to understand, and as we share, the peer learning, and to teach other parents and family members. And so it's not about just you building your own capacity, it's also you being able to share your learning with others in your community.
I'll tag on to that and just share that parents as leaders is really crucial. So parents not just receiving, but parents presenting, parents being part of that process, parents being part of, as you're creating your LCAP plan or whatever school plan you're working with, parents being active leaders in that process and given voice, and then seeing what they've offered or what they've shared on the plan and being followed up on. That is crucial. And the districts that can make a difference with this have those steps in place to make that happen. Yeah.
I'll jump in and say, as Families in Schools is a provider of lots of training and workshops, that all of that matters. But this is not just about another workshop. This is not just about another training. It's how you relate and engage as adults in the best interest of students, whether it's the teacher and the parent, the principal and the parent. And a lot of that requires a mind shift in just believing that parents have funds of knowledge and wisdom and that they know their child best to make the best decisions. And when you engage parents in that way, their confidence builds because you're believing in them, as opposed to what we have seen for lots of decades, that the educator or the professional knows best and they're the decision maker, they hold the power. And when parents experience that, their confidence diminishes, they feel shut out. So lots of the work here is about dispelling some myths that it's about another flyer and another workshop. Again, we do many workshops, they're important. Knowledge and information is powerful. But more important is how you treat and engage and relate to that parent, to that family, to that student, to that community leader.
You know, Yolie, I'd like to just chime in on this because I think, earlier on when I was doing an update, I talked about educator preparation. This is not an issue of teachers not liking families or not prioritizing families. This is an issue of teachers have not typically been prepared to engage families as partners in their child's education before they enter the classroom. And so they're having to shoot from the hip because the system has not prepared them. And I think this is where, when there's that understanding that it's not just about good public relations, it's not about checking the box, it's about developing relational trust with families to support student learning, right? To shorten that learning curve so that a teacher can better understand the student through their parents' eyes. And I think this is a great example of how a statewide initiative can be so profoundly successful, but that we are still challenged in this work to make sure that educators have the skills that they need so that they can maximize the opportunities that parents can provide.
Robin, was there something that you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, based on the structure in California, we have our county offices that we have 58 counties and districts are rostered to each of these counties. And what is powerful about the LCAP and what's being done in California is this intentionality that all of our large initiatives across the state, whatever plans that we have, are connected with families and students and even outside organizations. There's a new attitude or mindset that all must be at the table to make decisions around students and what's best for students. And so how do you do that? People haven't had the full intentional support or training. They have goodwill in heart sometimes, but the skill hasn't always been there. And so when we embarked on this LCAP, they said include families. And just like we've heard at the on this call, on this webinar, people thought it was just telling families what they were going to do, and that was how we involved them. But this initiative has given the backbone and the intentionality around the how piece. How does that really work? How do we actually have two-way conversation? How do we actually prepare our parents to be part of this decision-making opportunity and students with these complex high-level decisions that need to be made around how funding is to be spent? So there's a lot of intentionality and training that needs to go along with that. And so county offices in California have been by design equipped to actually train their districts on how to include parents in this conversation. And then we need our partners, like our nonprofits, CABE, Families in School, and all the rest, to actually go into those communities and then actually fill those gaps. So it is a holistic, comprehensive approach that California has realized that it takes all of us to do this work. Districts can't do it alone. We need nonprofits, community-based organizations, and then how do we really truly allow parents to have authentic voice? So the intentionality around training has been what has led California to this point and what we're still working on.
We've been talking a lot about this, some of these more individual interactions, but Robin, I also wanted to get your thoughts on when we think about scaling this for large scale impact. What do you have more to say about that? And then also for Robin and Yolie, how do you foresee measuring this impact as a result of the work of this initiative?
Well, thank you for that question. It's big because we started with 5 or 6 districts, and we have been able to grow even during a pandemic. So the one thing that we can talk about our scalability is that the model of the districts that are a part of this work have been the reflection of the importance of joining. So they have been the mirror to other districts and been our biggest recruitment and retention for those who see what's going on and want to come in. And then once they are in, the powerful networking that we have across districts have allowed this work to actually be scalable. And Stephen talked more that across California, we have over 1,000 districts. And right now we're working with 40 some. And you might say, well, that's not a lot compared to the number of districts, but the scalability was a strategic plan to recruit districts from various parts across the state to actually infuse and embed in all the corners of the state. So that was one intentionality, and that was written in statute. So when this team got together, this was how we actually began to design and look at our recruitment. So that is still in place, and we continue to grow that. Another way that we are planning on scaling is that we have a model to deepen facilitation skills of those districts that are a part of this process. So 1 or 2 leads from each of our districts, they began to actually become facilitators of the training, which allows for scalability as well, because you like to hear from your peers. And another way, and I'll let someone else chime in, another way for scalability is that the quality of leadership that came together to lead this in California. There was a very rigorous process that we went through in order to become the leads of this initiative, and that reputation of each of our organizations was also a part of the recruitment and the reason and how we can actually bring forward the districts that we serve, because we all had relationships across the state in various capacities. So those are just a little examples of how we have been able to scale this work. And I think my other colleagues can chime in.
I'll just add that the state of California is very committed to scaling and sustainability. So I mentioned in the very beginning when we kicked off, the legislature put in $13.5 million into the first 5 years. They've just kicked in $100 million to continue this for the next 5 years. So there is a deep commitment. Somebody talked about intentionality earlier, for this work to continue, for us to continue to add more districts into this process. And then doing that in all the ways that Robin just described.
You know, and one of the lessons, not the only one, but the one that kind of stands out for me in this is how important it is to bring these important components of community engagement, of student achievement into policy, into the legislative process. Because if it's there and it's required, you have to move forward with it. You know, we're being held accountable. We have to report to our legislature now on the impact and all that. But then it's seen as having high prestige and high priority. And so as much as we can, bringing in the programs that we know that make a difference for our diverse families and communities and students, and putting them into statute, into legislation, makes a big difference. And that is one lesson I think the policy advocacy community has learned in California, that if we can get in statute and legislation, it can make a big difference. And when you find the right allies at those systems, and there are a lot of them out there, if we can find the right allies, we can make it happen. And so that's been a real strength, using the system to really move this kind of work forward.
Wonderful. I just wanted to make a quick note for those of us who have joined us today. If you could take a moment and fill out the poll, it's really helpful for us at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for continuing to improve our webinar series. I did have one sort of quick question that anybody can answer from Deborah Bergeron. They are a Head Start professional, K-12 to Head Start professional. And they noticed that the family engagement within that Head Start space was something missing from the K-12 system. Is that something that is being connected with the community engagement initiative?
I can jump in, and maybe Robin from the county office perspective. You know, in California, we have Head Start and we have state preschools, and we have a lot of other early education programs. Many of the districts we're working with are PK, pre-K or TK, transitional kinder, and then going up into elementary, middle, or high. And so they've been very intentional about bringing their pre-K, their early education families into this sector as well. But Robin, from the county office perspective, I don't know if you'd want to share on that as well.
Yes, we have a great connection, and thank you, whoever raised that, because we will then use that voice to use the intentional language so that we can ensure that the scope seems more comprehensive. Just like we have rural districts who we're trying to figure out how to ensure that this initiative connects with them. All of our communities, we are embarking on the community schools, which many of you states have already done, but we're doing it in a great strategic way in California. And the community schools encompass that 0 through 5 plus all of the others. So we're really going from cradle to career. In our county office, that's a roadmap that we have called Cradle to Career, and it's designed that way. And so along the way, in order to be effective districts or an LEA, you need the voices of all your folks at the table. So everyone is able to be a part of the conversation, but we do have intentionality around how we're lifting the voices of all in the community. That's why we say community, and we are not bound to just those rostered to that district. But when you have those 0 to 5 that are later going to be part of that school system, they too are invited to the table to be a part of this grander and larger conversation, because they have a voice in ensuring that the best outcomes and services are going to be provided for their students as well. So thank you very much for bringing that to the forefront.
And just to add to that really quick, when you look at our teams, as we shared, we started off with 6 LEAs, 6 districts across the state. The mid-pandemic, we expanded 12 more districts. This past year, we expanded 24. And every time we've expanded, we've brought in other voices. And so we brought in Native Americans. We brought in the Early Learning Center, who was really translating the language for us. They're saying, in our world, here's how we say this. Here's how we think about this. And we're having that dialogue. So as we share and as we grow, we brought in the rural voice. We continue to bring in different experiences, because they, one, will make our work more enriched, but also 2, their experience is different, and our tools and resources and systems, as we shared earlier, might not be as responsive if we don't know their needs. And so Across California, the initiatives between community schools, expanding learning time opportunity, universal pre-K are all blending together and bleeding together, because fundamental to all of their successes is quality, strong, research-based community engagement.
And then maybe if I can just piggyback on that too, when we think of our early education families, who and what they represent, in California, almost 50% of our students come from a family that speak another language than English at home. And the great majority are Spanish, but there's many other languages as well. And that is really obvious when you come into the early education sector. That's where those languages just really flourish. And so I think making certain that we have the right tools and resources in to welcome families to create that kind of environment, whether it's through interpretation or translation, but also just cultural exchanges, just love, just engaging, just embracing is so important, because the diversity that we have coming at that early education level is vast. And if we can engage our parents and families at that level, they're going to follow us throughout the whole system as well.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today to talk about this initiative. Thank you, Vito, for moderating the conversation. Thank you to our commentators, as well as our ASL interpreters. Just a quick reminder about our upcoming webinars that you can see on the screen here, as well as the save the date for GLR Week 2023. Thanks again to everyone. We'll be sending out follow-up resources from this conversation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vito, for being our moderator.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Vito. Thank you, Hattie. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.